The facts are very clear. ICC claims to be an international court. But from the African perspective, we view it as not being such as at now. We view it as a court that represents perhaps 1/3 of the world's population, while we have the USA, Russia, China, and countries such as the world's largest democracy, India, are not members of the ICC state parties. Secondly, the ICC claims to be an independent court. Our argument is that it is not. Why? The ICC gives the world's most political body, the UN Security Council, special prosecutorial rights of referral and deferral over its activities. Secondly, or additionally, the European Union, through its constituent parts, provides over 70% of the ICC's budget, something which also violates the Rome Statute, which says that no one member state can pay more than 22% of the budget, and as we know, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Secondly, this is why no European, no NATO, no North American soldier or politician will ever appear before the ICC. This is why allegations of war crimes, crimes against humanity on a massive scale in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere continue to go unpunished. The ICC promises to end impunity, and the impunity, yet it has accorded legal impunity to US forces and allowed impunity for the forces of states that are allies to the United States of America and Europe. The ICC has promised to end immunity, but it has also promised to be a court of excellence. The reality is that it has failed any practical test. As a court, the court has been caught up in procedural irregularities, including allegations of hiding exculpatory evidence and witness tampering. And the latest one is about one of the judges, Gomede, who is alleged, and there is a complaint to that matter, to have received millions of dollars in an offshore account in order to falsify information on the prosecution of President al-Bashir of Sudan. I will provide with you documents from State Department that has now come out that the grounds that were used to prosecute al-Bashir were actually false. These are State Department. These are confirmation declaration in the courts of the United States of America by two Americans. One of them was the ambassador of the USA in Sudan. Every more disturbingly, it has appointed more judges meant to deal with very complex legal issues. Meanwhile, those judges at the ICC have never been lawyers in their countries. Most of the judges at the ICC have never been lawyers or judges in their countries. And you can't sit on a bench if you don't qualify to be sitting on the bench at national level. In other words, we are saying, as a FIFA analog is also in mind given the recent allegation of senior ICC judges that have had millions of dollars passed through their offshore accounts. To extend the FIFA analog, if true, this means that the ICC has gone past fixing the venue of the World Cups and on to match fixing. ICC is not for Africa. Not only is its African-owned focus racism unacceptable, but it's also caught up in persistent allegations of corruption and dysfunctioning. Africa, therefore, our argument is very clear that international justice system must be perfected. The ICC is the last court of appeal. And therefore, the establishment and the extension of the powers to the African court to include war crimes and genocide and international crimes, in short, is meant to perfect the international justice system. Because as a citizen, if you are indicted by the ICC as the first and last court, after that, there is no appeal. Where do you appeal? Everyone must be given an opportunity to be heard 2 or 3 times. That's what the justice system says. So the African court, with extended powers of international crime, is meant to provide that perfection to this wrapped and dysfunctional international justice system, where we all have the ICC as the first court and the last court, and you cannot appeal anywhere. And if you can't appeal, that justice system is considered dysfunctional. There is allegations that, for example, Sudan, president is indicted by the ICC on allegation of war crimes. Coercive measures are illegal in international human rights law. They are illegal in international law because you cannot apply sanctions unilaterally unless with the consent of the United Nations system and other bodies that provide international protection. Now, the United States of America has provided an illegal system of supporting the application of unilateral coercive measures on Sudan. For the last 30 years, and let's take it this way, these sanctions were imposed 30 years ago. The population of Sudan now is at about 60, 70 million. 70% of the Sudanese population is made up of the youth, young. It means they were all born after sanctions were imposed. And they are suffering the consequences of these unilateral coercive measures for which they were not a party to the problem. They were not there. And even just simple justice system clarifies that if my father is wrong, I cannot be prosecuted for sins alleged committed by my parents. Sudan now, this population of youth cannot access efficient education system. They can't access medical services. Babies are dying because hospitals cannot provide medicine. So, is that not crime enough? And the international system also says, and I want to quote a few things, that if a country decides to impose unilateral coercive measures, it must also be responsible for the consequences. That's what the international human rights system says. The USA has not. Now, we have these 2 documents here. There are 2 confessions. This one was in the United States District Court, District of Columbia. It's a declaration by a Mr. John E. Clonan. Mr. Clonan has provided evidence that the reasons that were forwarded by the USA government to indict Sudan and its leadership was also supporting terrorism were not true. This is a confession. This, you have an opportunity. The second one is from Mr. Timothy Michael Carney from their security system, but was also ambassador to Sudan. I want to read quote him just on 1 page. It's a declaration in the court also. This one is also in the District of Columbia. I believe, I quote, I believe that the United States' failure to respond to Sudanese offer in fighting counterterrorism efforts was due partially to 40 faulty United States intelligence that had inaccurately attributed anti-United States intentions. For example, I know that more than 100 United States intelligence reports, most of which date back to so many years, some of which allege that elements of Sudanese government planned action against United States personnel in Sudan were exaggerated and fabricated in early 1996. Those reports, though ultimately discredited, nonetheless established an atmosphere with such similar allegations, where such similar allegations were credited without sufficient information. This is again a confession by a very senior United States official. Now, this in itself is the cause of why, with us in Africa, you need to listen to us very well. When we argue on anything, it has been sufficiently analyzed with both internal and external political implication and consequences to the continent. You take Libya, for example. They went in, bombed Libya, and left Libya the way it is. If they had listened to Africa formula we had for Libya, Libya would not be where it is now. They did the same for Iraq. They did the same for many other countries. I am speaking on behalf of civil society. I sit with the leaders in their discussions. They mean well. The only problem we have is that there is a gap on information on why certain decisions are taken. And we blow them up because they are from Africa. If these confessions were from an African, by this afternoon, we would have an warrant of arrest being perpetrated by those from the West. Thirdly, there is now an attempt, and Africa rejects that. There is an attempt to amend the Rome Statute so that the UN Blue Berets, UN forces, peacekeepers, must have the powers to arrest our leaders when they are wanted by the ICC. What's that? Where is the sovereignty of our state? How can you have soldiers, you just send them into a country and say, go and arrest that one? What is more confusion? So understand Africa very well. We mean well for the continent. We mean well for this global community. And we mean well in our actions in order to perfect, especially the justice system, in all its regard. In January, I wrote a letter to President Obama analyzing the illegality of coercive measures that have imposed on Sudan. It's a developed world. He has never responded. Maybe when Trump comes, he may respond. We'll wait for that. Thank you so much.